Black sedans rolled down a Queen Street on a July afternoon in 1950, and 10-year-old Helen Sobell watched from her apartment window as men in dark suits stepped onto the hot pavement. The engines kept running. She called for her father, but Morton was already at the door, his face drained of color. When the FBI agents entered, they spoke quietly, almost politely, asking about his relationship with Julius Rosenberg. Morton's hands trembled as he poured water from a pitcher, the glass rattling against the kitchen table. He denied knowing anything about espionage, about stolen secrets, about midnight meetings. The agents wrote everything down and left. That night, Helen pressed her ear against the thin bedroom wall and heard her parents arguing in desperate whispers. The word Mexico floated through. Then running. Then executed. Dear viewers, my big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you subscribe, I'll keep creating even more fascinating and unique videos about the Cold War between the US and the USSR. And with your support, we'll get closer to that goal. I'm truly grateful to everyone who's helped me along the way. Now let's move into today's story. Morton Sobell had worked as an electrical engineer since graduating from City College in 1938. His resume included General Electric and Reeves Instrument Corporation, both connected to military projects during World War II. He designed fire control systems, radar components, navigation instruments. His wife, Helen, managed their modest apartment, raised 2 children, hosted weekend dinners with neighbors. The couple attended concerts at Carnegie Hall, walked through Prospect Park on Sundays. They seemed ordinary. Morton had known Julius Rosenberg since their college days, when both young men devoured Marxist literature and argued about workers' rights in crowded cafeterias. Those friendships persisted into adulthood. Julius and his wife Ethel visited the Sobell apartment regularly. The adults drank coffee, discussed politics, laughed at shared jokes. Young Helen thought of them as Uncle Julie and Aunt Ethel. She noticed her father sometimes left with Julius late at night, returning hours later. When she asked where they went, Morton ruffled her hair and said, "Boring engineering talk, sweetie." The lies were so casual they seemed like truth. By 1950, the world had hardened. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949, shattering American nuclear monopoly. Senator McCarthy waived lists of suspected communists. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover demanded results, arrests, confessions. The Bureau began investigating everyone who had joined leftist organizations in the 1930s, attended the wrong meetings, signed the wrong petitions. Former communist David Greenglass, Julius Rosenberg's brother-in-law, was arrested in June 1950 for stealing atomic secrets from Los Alamos during the war. Under interrogation, Greenglass broke. He named Julius as recruiter and organizer of espionage ring, and he named Morton Sobell as Julius's accomplice. 3 weeks after the FBI visit, Morton made his choice. On June 21, 1950, the family loaded their car with more belongings than any vacation required. Helen noticed her mother crying as she packed photograph albums, important documents, winter coats in summer heat. They drove south through humid days and sleepless nights, crossing into Mexico at Laredo. In Mexico City, Morton rented an apartment under a false name, paid cash for 6 months. He grew a beard and dyed his hair darker. The children were forbidden to speak English on the streets. Helen wandered through unfamiliar neighborhoods where vendors sold bright fruit and shouted in Spanish she couldn't understand. Her father made frequent phone calls from public booths, always checking over his shoulder. One evening, Helen entered the bathroom and found Morton burning papers in the sink, smoke curling toward the ceiling. She asked what he was doing. His voice cracked when he said, "Nothing important." The arrest came on August 16, 1950, at 5:47 p.m. Mexican police, coordinating with FBI, surrounded the apartment building. Helen answered the knock at the door. Men pushed past her before she could speak, guns drawn, voices sharp with commands. They grabbed Morton and slammed him against the wall, his cheek pressed to the plaster. His wife screamed. The children cried. Helen watched as agents tore apart their apartment, pulled books from shelves, dumped drawers, sliced open mattresses. They found the false passport, the American money hidden in a coffee can, letters addressed to the fake name. Morton was dragged out in handcuffs, his beard and dyed hair making him look like a stranger. Helen ran after him down the stairs, but an agent caught her arm and pulled her back. She saw her father's face turn toward her for one moment, not angry, not frightened, but resigned, like he'd been expecting this ending all along. The family was taken to a detention facility with concrete floors and fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. Helen and her brother were separated from their parents for 6 hours. An American agent with a kind voice and cold eyes sat across from Helen in a small room. He asked about her father's friends, about visitors to their apartment, about the nights Morton came home late. Helen answered truthfully because she was 10 years old and didn't understand that truth could be a weapon. Yes, Uncle Julie visited often. Yes, they talked in her father's study with the door closed. Yes, her father had a camera and photography equipment, though she never saw what he photographed. Yes, they left suddenly for Mexico, and her father seemed scared. The agent wrote everything down in a spiral notebook, nodding encouragingly. When Helen asked if she could see her mother, he said, "Soon, honey. You're doing great." Back in the United States, Morton was charged with conspiracy to commit espionage. The FBI questioned Helen repeatedly over the following months. They showed her photographs of men and asked if she recognized them. She pointed to David Greenglass. Yes, he'd visited once or twice. She described her father's friendship with Julius in detail, trying to be helpful, thinking cooperation would bring her family back together. An agent asked if her father ever mentioned Russia or the Soviet Union. She remembered him saying once that the Soviets had done impressive things with electrification. She mentioned it. The agent underlined something in his notes. Helen's mother refused to answer FBI questions, invoking her Fifth Amendment rights, crying in interrogation rooms until they let her go. But her daughter kept talking, each truthful answer another brick in the wall being built around her father. The trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg began on March 6, 1951, in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. Morton Sobell was named as co-defendant. The courtroom filled each day with journalists, spectators, and protesters. Helen was not called to testify. Prosecutors deemed her too young for the witness stand, but her FBI interview statements were entered into evidence and referenced by prosecutors. David Greenglass took the stand and testified that Julius Rosenberg had recruited him to steal atomic bomb designs from Los Alamos, that Julius was the organizer of a Soviet spy ring, that Morton Sobell was part of the network and delivered stolen documents. Greenglass's wife Ruth corroborated the story. Morton sat silently at the defense table, refusing to testify, invoking the Fifth Amendment to every question. His lawyer argued lack of direct evidence, called the Greenglasses liars trying to save themselves. It didn't matter. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours. On March 29, 1951, Judge Irving Kaufman read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Then came the sentence. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg would be executed. Morton Sobell received 30 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted. Helen read the newspaper headlines the next morning at her aunt's house where she and her brother now lived. She saw her father's photograph. The same kind face that had helped her with homework, taught her to ride a bicycle. The article called him a traitor who sold atomic secrets to Russia. She read that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg would die in the electric chair. That night, she vomited until nothing was left. Appeals climbed through the courts for 2 years. Lawyers argued insufficient evidence, prejudiced jury, excessive punishment. The Rosenberg supporters held protests outside the White House, circulated petitions, wrote letters to President Eisenhower begging for clemency. The president refused, stating that the Rosenbergs' crimes occurred during wartime and demanded ultimate punishment. On June 19, 1953, the execution was scheduled for 8:00 p.m. at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. Rabbis, lawyers, and family members made final visits during the day. Julius and Ethel said goodbye to their 2 young sons in the morning. The boys were taken away crying. At 8:00 p.m., Julius Rosenberg was led into the execution chamber and strapped into the electric chair. The executioner threw the switch at 8:04 p.m. 3 jolts of 2,000 volts coursed through his body. He was pronounced dead at 8:06 p.m. Attendants removed his body and brought in Ethel. She was strapped in at 8:11 p.m. The first jolt didn't kill her. Her heart continued beating. 2 more shocks. Smoke rose from the electrode on her head. The doctor checked her pulse. Still alive. 2 more shocks were administered. She was finally pronounced dead at 8:16 p.m. News of the execution reached the public within minutes. Helen, now 13 years old, heard about it on the radio while doing dishes at her aunt's house. She dropped a plate. It shattered on the floor. She walked to her room, locked the door, and didn't come out for 3 days. Her aunt brought food that sat untouched on a tray. Morton Sobell was transferred to Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in 1952, then to Atlanta, then Lewisburg. He served 18 years in various maximum security facilities. His wife Helen worked as a teacher to support the children, visiting Morton when the prison system allowed, which was rarely. Their daughter Helen grew into adolescence, carrying a weight she couldn't name. Classmates asked about her father. She learned to change the subject, to say he worked far away, to deflect and evade. In 1957, she was accepted to Columbia University, but struggled with severe depression during her freshman year. She began seeing a therapist, a kind woman with gray hair who asked gentle questions. In their 10th session, the therapist asked, "Do you blame yourself for what happened to your father?" Helen broke down completely, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. She'd been blaming herself for 7 years. The 1960s brought revisionist analyses of the Rosenberg case. Historians questioned the evidence, noted the lack of direct proof connecting Ethel to espionage, argued that the punishment was excessive and politically motivated. Some scholars suggested Ethel Rosenberg was innocent, that she died only because prosecutors hoped threatening her would force Julius to confess and implicate others. These arguments appeared in academic journals and newspaper opinion pieces. Helen read them all, searching for absolution she never found. In 1965, at age 25, she visited her father at Lewisburg Penitentiary. They sat across from each other at a metal table in a room monitored by guards. The conversation was painful and stilted. They discussed safe topics, weather, her job, his health. Neither mentioned the trial, the testimony, the execution of the Rosenbergs. When the visit ended, Helen walked to her car and drove 200 miles before pulling over to cry. Morton Sobell was released on parole in January 1969, having served 18 years. He was 57 years old, gray-haired and thin. He moved back in with his wife, who had waited for him. He tried to reconnect with his adult children. His daughter Helen maintained polite distance, calling on birthdays, visiting on major holidays, keeping conversations brief. She'd built a life in California, far from New York, far from memories. She married, had children of her own, worked as a librarian. She rarely spoke about her father or her childhood. When her own children asked about their grandfather, she said he'd made mistakes during difficult times and left it at that. Decades passed. Morton aged into his 80s, then 90s. He remained largely silent about his past, maintaining his innocence publicly despite the conviction. Then, on September 11, 2008, the New York Times published an interview with 91-year-old Morton Sobell. In it, he finally confessed. Yes, He had been a Soviet spy. Yes, he had passed military secrets to Soviet agents during and after World War II. Yes, Julius Rosenberg was guilty as charged, but he insisted Ethel had been innocent, that she knew nothing about her husband's espionage activities, that she died for crimes she didn't commit. Helen read the article in her home in San Francisco. She was 68 years old. She'd spent 58 years wondering if her childhood testimony had destroyed an innocent man. Now she knew the truth. Her father was guilty. But the knowledge brought no relief. She had helped convict a guilty man, but her truthful statements had also contributed to the case that sent 2 people to the electric chair. One of them, perhaps, innocent. Was justice served? She couldn't answer. She never spoke to her father again after the confession. Morton Sobell died on December 26, 2018, at the age of 101, one of the last surviving figures from the atomic spy cases of the 1950s. He never apologized to his children for the ordeal he'd put them through. The Sobell case demonstrates the brutal arithmetic of Cold War espionage. No winners, only degrees of loss. Morton Sobell made his choice to betray military secrets to a foreign power. He gambled and lost, but the punishment extended far beyond the guilty man. His children grew up branded as traitors' offspring, carrying shame that wasn't theirs to carry. Helen's testimony, truthful, innocent, given by a frightened child, became a weapon in the government's case. Could she have remained silent? Should she have? She was 10 years old, asked direct questions by federal agents, wanting only to help her family. The moral complexity offers no comfortable answers. The Rosenbergs' execution remains one of the most controversial episodes of the Cold War. Were they martyrs to government overreach or traitors who deserved their fate? Evidence revealed after the fall of the Soviet Union suggests Julius was guilty of espionage, though his specific contribution to Soviet atomic bomb development remains debated. Ethel's guilt is more questionable. She likely knew about her husband's activities, but evidence of active participation is thin. Their 2 sons, orphaned at ages 10 and 6, spent their lives fighting to clear their parents' names, seeking exoneration that never fully came. Morton Sobell's children lived a different nightmare, knowing their parent was guilty, wondering if their honesty contributed to the deaths of others. Helen carried that question to her grave when she died in 2019, 1 year after her father. She never found an answer that satisfied her. The case poses an impossible question that echoes through Cold War history. What do we owe family versus country? Where is the line between loyalty and complicity? How do we judge the choices people made under impossible pressure? The Cold War created thousands of such impossible choices, leaving a trail of broken families, destroyed lives, and moral ambiguities that persist today. The Sobell case isn't a story with heroes and villains. It's a story about human beings trapped in the machinery of history, making choices that seemed reasonable at the time and devastating in retrospect. Morton Sobell spied for a foreign power. The FBI pursued him. His daughter told the truth. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg died. Everyone involved paid a price that echoed across generations. The question of whether justice was served has no clear answer. Only the weight of consequences that crushed everyone it touched.